Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Hi, I'm Nathan Oakley, and over the course of the next hour you will hear a radio broadcast that was broadcast out in the States on Monday the 18th, or for us in the UK when we did it, Tuesday the 19th, but Monday Night Raw with Jeranism, which went out on TFR Radio. So I will put you onto my screensaver, and without further ado, give you some of that broadcast. I'll also leave a link to the full broadcast in the info box below this video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages. You are tuned in to your protection from deception right here at truthfrequencyradio.com. And lucky you, you are dialed in. You have the dial set correctly for the number one show on TFR on Monday nights between the hours of 6 and 9 p.m. Pacific. That's 9 to midnight Eastern. The show is Jeranism Monday Night Raw, and it starts now. I'm your host, Jaren from Jeranism, and with me, or not with me actually, with me in spirit is Missa. She is out doing some errands, but she should be back maybe for the second half of the show. So you don't just get to hear me, though, because I know that would upset you and you'd probably cry, and we don't want that. So what I did is I went out and found two of the best. I don't think they've ever been on the show, either one of them, but they are Nathan Oakley and Anthony Riley. Are you guys there?
Yeah. Hello.
Awesome. So just a quick introduction. I mean, I think Nathan, you might have been one of my very first interviews. Nathan Oakley had his show. What was that show called again? I don't remember.
Way back then.
Huh? What was it back
then?
Yeah, there you go. And I know I was on that show a few times, and Nathan Oakley's been with us for the whole ride. And with him is Anthony Riley, goes as Sleeping Warrior. Anthony, why don't you tell people about you? I'm not sure I know too much either, so yeah, tell me.
37, born in the UK, live in the UK. I went through the legal system. I studied A-level law. I studied undergrad law, and then I went and did a postgrad diploma in law, and then didn't work in law. I then opened up my own small business and somehow found my way into Flat Earth, and then applied everything that I learned in terms of evidence into Flat Earth and kind of realised that, hey, there's a bit of an issue here. This is quite interesting. And somewhere along the way, I've kind of run into Nathan, bumbled my way into Nathan, and then basically the door, everything started opening up into it. And before I knew it, I ended up realizing that we're being lied to. And here we are.
Yeah. About when did you appear on the scene? Because I can't recall when I first started to see you.
Well, my first baptism of fire, as I like to affectionately call it, was with Red's Rhetoric. I went into one of his hangouts. I posted a comment on one of his videos, and I had footage of my own from the International Space Station. And the way I had the picture, I couldn't orientate it in my mind how it was possible that this could possibly be the tin can floating around in space. Right. And I asked him, could he explain it? And he sent me a link. I followed it in, and basically I got put back 6 months by that first meeting with anybody on Flat Earth because he used my own evidence against me, and that was like really, it was like a real wake up moment for me. But then it put me back by 6 months, so I started to do my own research on the ISS and started to look at tall buildings near where I lived and started to do some observations of myself and started to test this nonsense that we're told of, which is that we live on a little spinning ball, and see whether or not it stood up to scrutiny. And I realised very quickly that it didn't, and that was about maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And then I came onto Flat Earth with my first observation, which was like Blackpool Tower from Hoy Lake, 30 miles away, and it's flat. And I don't know, it was probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And then from there, it was just a case of present it. I got involved with Mick West, I got involved with Debunking, I got involved with other people, and then it started knitting all together for me. And basically, I've never really found any evidence to explain what I could see and what we could test and what we can observe to prove that we live on a sphere. So it was about 18 months ago I came into it, and basically this is where I'm at now.
Yeah, something so fundamental, something so matter of fact, taught to 6-year-olds and just in passing and no support. You would expect something like that to be just so much evidence that's overflowing. And then when you get to be this age and you go looking for it, the lack of it is evidence in and of itself, you know. So also with you is Nathan Oakley. And Nathan, you started out with the show and you were doing interviews of people. And if people don't know what you're doing now, on your channel, NathanOakley1980, I believe is the name of the channel, you are doing something very interesting that I think I kind of thought of before. And I said, no, that'll never work. And I don't know how you could ever pull it off. And even when you started it, I have to say that I thought, oh, this will never last. It's just going to be a kind of fly in the pan kind of thing. And I don't know if it's been a year or how long you've been going, but Nathan is providing a platform for open debate. So Nathan, why don't you tell everybody about what made you try that and how you've been able to stick with it?
Well, I mean, open debate is probably a bit of a loose term in that regard. It's open to the public. Anybody can join, but you do have to contend with me and Anthony most of the time. So kind of open to a certain extent. But yeah, I mean, it's been maybe 6 months of battling trolls, because having an open platform means that people want to shut it down and join and play pornography or swear or whatever they can to disrupt it.
Well, and I got to tell you both, you guys, thank you from me, because it was coming at me from every angle. It got to the point where I'm not going to look at comments anymore. I just couldn't do it. I'm just going to leave them. But come to find out, a lot of what you're doing is kind of taking some of the pressure off me. So thank you very much for doing that.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's kind of the reverse of most people's psychology, which is kind of get these horrible, evil people away from me, whereas I'm kind of embracing them and going, come on, give us your best evidence.
Yeah,
and
bring them over.
It works. It seems to be working now in our favour as flat earthers, because I think, especially at the moment, more Anthony and a few others than me have stumbled upon just an absolute devastating part of their argument. And it's complicated, I'm not going to lie, but by the same token, it's not complicated. It's actually quite basic. And we're basically sort of showing people the magic trick and the how of that magic trick, which isn't the most important part of the story for most people. For most people, the most important story, the reason for the story is the why of the story. You know, why have a lie about the globe? Whereas in this instance, we're looking at the how. How have they actually deceived us? And you guys a second ago were talking about the ISS. Well, that's kind of their air defences for the globe in terms of the surface level stuff. Whereas this is the thing we've been looking at is the ground level stuff. So Anthony mentioned about debating with red rhetoric, and you guys won't have to, in the audience that is, won't have to look very far to find people debating about how much you should see in a photograph from Jesse Kozowski or from Joshua Newicki or from Anthony or from anybody else, where they just literally take a picture of something and say, right, this is how much of the world I can see. It seems to be completely flat. And then what do you know? They come up with some mathematics to show how your observation of the seemingly flat world isn't actually flat. It seems to be curved according to them. And you can't wrap your head around, how are they doing this to me? It seems flat, but yet they're using mathematics that show that it isn't. So it's a bit of a mind bender. And that's how a lot of the debates have gone. Now, at this stage, we're already well past the fact that we found out that they're assuming it's a sphere from every which way. So no matter which proof you find with a sphere Earth, you tend to find that there's already a presupposition in place, and that would be the R value. But we're already kind of accepting that and then, humouring them, allowing them to beg the question of R.
Yeah, clear
how the discussion goes.
Just so people know what you're talking about, he's talking about the R value, meaning the radius of Earth, which is obviously needed for most of their assumptions or most of their calculations. You have the radius of Earth because you have a sphere and you've got that distance between the center of the sphere and the surface. And what Nathan and Anthony have started to do is call people out for the evidence of that radius. Because if you think about it, we've only dug 8 miles deep at the most, if you believe that. The oceans are at the most 9 or 7 or 8 or 9 miles deep, as far as we know. So therefore, they've got a radius of 3959. Where is the evidence of that radius? And usually, what we're finding out is that it's an assumption. Correct?
Exactly. It's based on sticks in the ground from a couple of thousand years ago, if that story is true at all. I know you guys on this show have been looking at things like the deception of history, full stop.
Right.
So, if that's true, which I don't think it is, then yeah, it's based on a couple of sticks in the ground from a couple of thousand years ago, and that's the science behind it. According to these guys, it's laughable when you dig into it. So yeah.
And the other thing I thought you guys have done well, and we'll get into the details of the perspective issue, but I mean, from my just an outsider's point of view, two things. Number one, I don't know if you went to debate classes or how you in 6 months got so good at debating. I don't know if it's just from practice, but it seems like you're a different person, really. And then also like Arwen. Arwen's the same way. I mean, I remember listening to him 6 months ago and thinking, oh, this poor guy, he's going to get knocked around in there. And he kind of was. And now when I listen to him, he's doing awesome. So, I mean, that's really impressive to me. I never took debate in high school. It's something I wish I would have because I think it's important I like to debate. I like to, mix it up. But I don't know the methods. I don't know, the wordings. It just seems like you guys are really nailing it. So what is it that's gotten you to pick up on that end? Is it basically just practice?
I think it's the Hank Hill story, Nath.
To Anthony, because originally the format I sort of thought was I wanted to show people how the globe heads obfuscated every single point, and by sort of showing the audience how that was happening, I thought I was doing a good service. Look, this is how they obfuscate every single point we ever have. And at some stage, Anthony took me to one side and just said, don't do this anymore. Don't let them get away from the point and obfuscate it whenever there's a winning point. Try and take a bit more control. So I said, fine, that's absolutely fine by me. I can do that. And in terms of how I could do that, again, I'll give credit to someone else, JLB. He basically highlighted how to use certain debating tactics and spot other people's logical fallacies. So he just highlighted them in a few different videos. And I paid attention because I was debating in the comments at the time. This is a few years back. But yeah, you're absolutely right about Arwen. He's come a massive way, and I think it's because of just doing it. It's just being a baptism of fire, whatever you want to call it. It's been dragged through the mud, and now 6 months later, you go, wow, this concept with perspective. Arwen's been describing it really well for about 2 or 3 months, and everyone's ridiculed him. And now I've caught up and gone, oh wow, I've listened back to a couple of old debates and gone, oh wow, Arwen had this right. And he was being called, slant earther and all this. But yeah, it's really down to Anthony pushing me to not let the Globers obfuscate every single point.
Well, yeah, it came from an example with Hank Hill. And what happened was we were talking about the distance to the sun. Now, obviously, everyone knows the 93 million mile distance. But Hank was talking about this element of the discussion with Paper Explanator. And his point was, how do you know the distance to any of the celestial bodies? And Paper Explanator had started off with a point. And you know what it's like, they obfuscate to death the point. Hank had spotted that he was obfuscating initially and reeled him back on topic. But then somehow we managed to continue the obfuscation and Hank lost interest in the conversation. And the point then was lost. And I just said to Nathan, listen, Hank was winning that point there. His toes were to the fire. Perhaps it's better that, given that we're minorities, perhaps we should keep it on point when it's obvious that we've got these guys cornered and we can win the point. We can win that debate. And Nathan thought about it and he was like, yeah, okay, we'll try it. So we used the next few Hangouts to test it and to see how we could do it. And basically what ultimately happened was Nathan metamorphosized from a caterpillar into a butterfly, but obviously in doing so destroyed a lot of their arguments that they continuously obfuscate all the time. Because it's obvious now that they don't even know the distance to the sun. Where did it come from? And there is no answer. No one knows where that distance come from. So any flat earther can ask any ball earther, where did it come from? Put the toes to the fire, let them come up with something, and it'll always reference an astronomical unit. Where did that astronomical value come from of 93 million miles? And there doesn't seem to be an answer. I may be wrong, but no one seems to know where it comes from. It just seems to be an accepted truth.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I think JLB did an excellent job of exposing that before. I've listened to that debate back a few times. Sorry, my microphone is breaking here, so if you're wondering what I'm doing. But the other thing that I've noticed that you've done a good job of, Nathan, is pointing out that I don't know how it's so easily done, or at least you're cornering them on it, is the fact that what their belief is a religion. And I think that in some way that you're doing it, it's making them realize it for the first time. And maybe that's just something I've noticed in the past maybe 2-3 weeks when I listen to shows, because I tend not to be able to watch videos as much. When I'm making a video, I can listen to other videos. So, debate channel is great, things like that I don't have to watch. I can just listen. And what I'm hearing, is these guys basically coming and saying something back, saying something again, and then it's kind of settling in to them. They're finally realizing, oh, well, okay, I guess it is just, I believe what men tell me. And, that's fine, because some people make that decision, and I'm not going to tell them that they're not allowed to make that decision. You're absolutely allowed, if you want to put your life, if you want to put your beliefs and your trust in a bunch of men who have basically decided which facts are going to be facts, and then put them in school books and told you to learn them. If you think that's a safe way to attack the truth, and you think that's a safe way to know the truth, then by all means go ahead. But I think people fail to realize that that's what's happening, and you guys have done a great job of really cornering that, or at least putting it to them.
I think that's probably credit to John, who's known as Quantum Eraser, and he's basically highlighted that over the course of the last 3 years, we'll hear over and over again that the body of science backs the sphere Earth assertion, and it doesn't. There is no backing from science. So when I'm asking them the question, what's your scientific evidence of the R value, that's their sole presupposition. So Anthony was saying, well, where do they get the 93 million miles away? Well, that's based on R. The extrapolation from the Cavendish experiment gives you the gravitational constant, and then you get the AU value to give you the distance to the sun. But it's based on a presupposition, the radius of Earth. And back to sticks and shadows, that's where we get it from. So when you start asking them, what's the scientific evidence, and they give you that, you can rip it to pieces based on the scientific method, the actual application of science, and say, well, right, well, let's have a look at it. Let's work out what this actually does scientifically. Can you formulate a scientific hypothesis? Can you actually observe a phenomena? And most of the time they fail at the first step. There isn't actually any observed phenomena. They conjure one, things like gravity.
Go ahead, I was saying right. Hello?
Sorry?
I lost you. Go ahead.
That's it. They essentially conjure out of thin air a phenomena, and it's an affirming the consequence. So an example of this, again, this is Quantum Eraser, who's sort of explained this to us on the debates, or at least on the flat earth side, an affirming the consequent formal logical fallacy. So you've got, if I eat a full 12-inch pizza, I am full. So therefore, if I am full, I have just eaten a 12-inch pizza. Yeah? So it's an affirming the consequent. So they would say, if gravity exists, then objects of mass will attract one another. Objects of mass will attract one another, offer up the Cavendish experiment, therefore gravity. Mm-hmm. So in other words, they're affirming the consequent. The same principle applies almost every time when they try and give you anything that says that they have measured the Earth. They will start with the presupposition that it's a sphere, and then say, well, I go to the horizon and measure the dip angle. Well, the dip angle of what? Well, of the sphere Earth, of course. Right. So they're already assuming they're on a sphere before they've done anything. They already know they're on a sphere. And when you say, well, what's the sphere value that you're already presuming we have? Well, it's based on the R value. That's based on the radius. So it's always coming back to the same value, the R value. And that's what's mathematics for working out how much things should be obscured. It's all based on R. And that R has no scientific backing to it. It's just an assumption.
Right. No, and that you've done a great job of showing that. And, that goes to so many of the experiments of old. The Cavendish, like you mentioned, if people don't know what that is, look that up. Basically Cavendish went in his shed and set up some torsion balance with 2 lead balls, and then put telescopes through the walls, and then looked and determined that the number for big C is 0.000000062 whatever. So it's pretty funny that nobody asked the question of, well, what were the walls made of? What was the ceiling made out of? Everything controlled? We're talking about 300 years ago. So what's happening, and what I think happened, is they handed these guys the figures, the mathematics, and said, go do a test that shows this. And that's what you're talking about. They needed those numbers to be the answer. And so that's why, have you ever heard about the first measuring of the speed of light? Basically there's a guy, this is before light bulbs, and he shot lights off of mirrors like several miles away. It's just ridiculous that, we're told these things and to believe these things. And so, yeah, I think that once we get people to look at how they got to these answers, and then they'll realize, and I think you have to go through, I know, Anthony, you've done a ton of research too, that you have to do that kind of research to start to see things just appear. It's not a matter of, okay, well, I think that the earth might be flat or it might be round, so I'm going to go measure this water, and I look over it, and now there looks like there's a little bit of curve, and then you think that the earth's a globe. If that's all I did, then I would think that too. And if there's so many evidences of the globe Earth, but they've all been handed to you and told to you and taught to you, and the more we dig into them, they're not evidence at all, and they're certainly not proof. And so I think that what you guys are doing is really exposing that. When we get back from the break in a little bit, I want to really break down the idea of perspective. And I did talk about it not last week, but 2 weeks ago, and put out for the entire 3-hour call. I had an open challenge for any Glober to call in and debunk it, and we had 0 calls. So we had other calls, but nobody calling that wanted to debunk that. So I thought that was interesting. Basically, I just laid it out there like we've talked about it before. So we'll get to that when we get back. But what's some of the other things, Nathan, that you've seen or some other happenings? Why don't you tell people about the interaction with Mr. Mick West?
Okay. Yeah, that was an interesting one because we came across this perspective angle and just started to attack Mick West based on the calculations that he put out there. And like with all the shows, the link's public, anybody can join, and Mick West watches the show. Doesn't often say anything in the chat, but we were then calling him out and saying, your mathematics are a farce, and after you beg the question of R, so we're already well down this begging the question fallacy at this point when we're into the calculation, which maybe before the break, that's probably the point that I should leave this on rather than sort of going into Mick West coming in to defend his absolute nonsense mathematics. But that's exactly it. You kind of get the point across that you're already into begging the question when you use curve calculators. The clue is in the title. It begs the question. It's called a curve calculator. So every single outcome that calculator gives you says the Earth's a sphere. So it doesn't matter what values you put in. You can put in any values, right, and the answer it gives is always sphere. So it always begs the question. And that's kind of where we were starting with Mick West. But we went on to getting him in based on the total omission of perspective calculation in his calculator. Now, he can be a little bit weaselly in this, and we've discussed this on the show, because he can claim that there's no need. He doesn't have a target in the calculator, therefore shifting the blame from himself onto every single person who's ever used the calculator ever, because they've all got it wrong. They've ignored perspective from the calculation. And right, the calculator forces that to be an issue of the user. The user needs to address this in the target that's pumped into the calculation. So he can kind of weasel his way out of that. But we didn't let him. We held his toes to the fire anyway and said, you're basically lying to the world using these mathematics. And the way you've done it is to exclude perspective.
Anthony, tell him about the beginning of that conversation where you pointed out something I thought was really a good find, that he had a link in that calculator, and just tell people a little bit about where that link went and where it should have gone and what in the world reason did it go where it went.
I'm not sure what you're referring to with the link. You're on about the International Standard Atmosphere?
Yep.
His 7.6R is based on, it's based on a geometric curve. 7.6 of the radius of the Earth. So the radius of the Earth is given the value of 6.6. So he adds 1/6 on top of it and bends light to that effect. And he claims that it's based on the International Standard Atmosphere, which he gives a link on his curve calculator. But when you open up the link that he claims that his 7.6R is based on, there is no word radius in the link anywhere. There is nothing to do with 7.6 or anything to do with what he claims the 7.6 geometric curve is based on. Is not based on that whatsoever. When you open up the link, it gives 4 variables. You've got pressure, you've got density, you've got the gas law in molar form, and you've got one other one. I can't remember what the 4th one is off the top of my head. But they're the four variables that fluctuate, and they are a continuous solving of the equation that is presented within the ISA, the International Standard Atmosphere. So he claims that it's based on a link that it absolutely bears no resemblance whatsoever to that which he's claiming, which is a geometric curve. So it's got nothing to do with it whatsoever. And I said to him, well, why are you linking to a document that is not, it's not accurate whatsoever? And he basically leaves it in there, and he knows that it's not referencing it whatsoever, but he leaves it in there to add it's to add a perceived credibility to the point he's making. In other words, it's a false citation. It's a fraudulent citation. It isn't referencing that which he claims it is at all.
Right, because if anybody sees that link there, they're going to immediately assume, oh, okay, well, he's going to link to where that value comes from, so there's no reason to question it or no reason to follow that link. And if you did, you would see exactly what Anthony saw, which is that there's no even the word radius there. So we got a break coming up. When we get back, what we're going to do is kind of go through the idea of perspective. Like Nathan said, it is a little bit hard to understand, but on the other hand, it's so simple because it's something that we observe every single day, and there's really no arguing that fact. So we'll talk about that when we get back. Don't go anywhere. You're just Monday Night Raw.
TFR. My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Truth Frequency Radio.
All right, welcome back. I just spent the entire commercial break trying to fix my microphone and still didn't do it. So moved my office today or moved to the other side of the room. Missa bought me a desk for $10 off Craigslist, and I had to move my microphone, and I broke it in the process, and now I can't fix it. So sucks to be me. So before we went to break, we were talking to Nathan and Anthony Riley, and one thing I also wanted to mention before we get into the perspective was, I don't get to listen to all the shows, maybe a couple a week at most. And recently somebody had wrote me an email and said, oh, did you hear yesterday's show? Jason from Awake Souls was in there calling you a fraud, all this stuff. I said, what? And he's like, oh, don't worry. Nathan had your back. I'm like, what? I got to go listen to this. And I was pleasantly surprised. Thank you, Nathan, for coming to my rescue, because basically this guy's just in there making ridiculous claims like I've faked the Kanagawa observations, which aren't even my observations. They're off of a website where tons of people have done it, hundreds of pictures. And so, I've always had problems with those guys. And, it's one of the things, and I heard you laugh at one point when he made a religious reference. But if you really think about it, you've got people like this going around saying that they believe in Jesus. They are working for God. They're working for Jesus. And then they get things like that wrong. And it makes me really think like, well, something's not right here. Because if Jesus is real and you're really doing what he wants you to do and you're working for him, then you wouldn't get something like accusing me of faking evidence wrong. It just baffles me how they also told everybody that they were going to be picked up on August 24th last year at the tribulation or whatever. So, I mean, these guys are out of their minds. But thank you, Nathan, for doing that. I appreciate that.
Anytime.
For evidence.
Nice people.
Yeah, and evidence. They just that's what they're missing. It's like bring some of that. So go ahead.
That was when I realised that he was actually having a proper go at you. I remember watching that video that you brought out on Canagoo, and I remember at the time, I can't remember the exact website, but I remember it was an external website that you went to reference it, and I think it was something to do with photography, if I remember correctly. But whatever it was external. It wasn't Jeranism.com. It wasn't something within Flat Earth. It was genuinely independently external. And I remember watching it, and I remember thinking at the time, wherever this is great Flat Earth evidence. And when he said that you faked it and frauded it or whatever, instantly I thought that was a third-party website. I said, so that means that you've got proof that Jeran owns the website that you're claiming that he's faked it and frauded it on. And basically, his response was along the lines of, yeah, but you haven't debunked it yet. And I'm like, but you haven't proved your claim yet, moron. So he thinks that because he said it, therefore we've got to prove that it's wrong.
Right.
It's like, no, it's the other way around. If you say it, you've got to prove that it's true first.
Right. He always says, well, nobody's ever come to our channel and debunked the things we said. And it's like, well, nobody watches that channel. So, of course, that doesn't mean that, somebody could just go have a channel with no subscribers and no views and say a bunch of things and they're all true. That's not the way it works. So, those guys are classic jokers. But have you guys seen the site Beyond Horizons?
I've heard of it. I've not been to it.
Yeah, you should go there. Check it out. It's a website. They obviously don't seem to be affiliated with Flat Earth at all, but what it is just a website where people can submit photographs that they've taken from, and it's a really good site because they give the location that they were at. Usually it's in kilometers. I don't know why you people over there cannot get your stuff straight and get onto the imperial system, but they give you the distance that they are away from the ground. They give you the their altitude. They give you the distance to the mountain and how tall the mountain peak is. And then they show you these pictures, and some of them are just unbelievable. I mean, that site alone is proof of the flat Earth because there's some of those observations, like Kanagawa for one, 170 miles, and even though the observer is at 1,000 feet, it's a known location because they meet there like twice a year to watch this phenomenon when the sun sets and creates a silhouette behind the entire mountain chain of Kanagawa. And so it's 1,000 feet, and the height of Kanagawa at its peak is about 9,200 feet. And from that, the distance of 170, there shouldn't be any of that mountain shown. And so, whenever you get in these conversations with these ball believers, they'll always say, yeah, but you can't see the shore. It's like, yeah, I know we can't see the shore, but let's get on to the important point here which is you shouldn't see any of that mountain because it's blocked by the curvature of the earth. Yet you see not just the very tip of the mountain, but you see the entire mountain chain, including mountains half the size of it. It is so evidence. And then I love how Nathan puts this, but if you're going to believe in the globe at that point, you then have to believe in magical levitating mountain chains, which cannot be shown in any kind of evidence. It can't be shown in any experiment. It simply must be because there's got to be an excuse. There's got to be a reason why you're seeing something that isn't there. So it must be a mirage, and that's why I put that at the beginning.
Yeah, what you see here is a mirage, right?
Right, exactly. And that was one of the big things for me, too. At the beginning, I said, why are they calling that a mirage? We know what a mirage is. We know what a mirage looks like. So why would you say that these buildings, which are there, they're displayed for you perfectly at the horizon line? Granted, that the bottom third of those buildings are cut off by what appears to be water. And so what the Globers will go to is they'll just point that out and walk away from the fact that none of the buildings should be seen. So, that's how they get away with it. So in talking about that, this goes back to, it was probably a year ago, and I could probably find you the exact Globebusters show, but John actually brought it up. John showed a picture of a sphere Earth, or actually just a picture of a circle, the orthographic side-on view, and showed a mountain, and then showed a person and said, we're not taking into account that the mountain gets smaller with distance. And I looked at that and I said, okay, I see what you're saying. And I said, let me get back to you this week. And I looked at it for a little bit and just said, and I think it is. I think we are accounting for it. And I kind of dismissed it and it went away. I never heard about it again. And then the morning that you were talking to me, and I told people the story, but it's funny because I sat there and kind of argued with you for a little while and said, no, you're not right. Nope, I don't think so. Nope. And then it kind of started to sink in and then it hit me. And I'm like, dude, you're right. And so the first thing I did was I ran inside and woke up my wife. It's what she always gets woken up with my crazy guess what I just found? And I woke her up, and I was trying to explain it to her, and she just kept shaking her head and said, nope, that's not right. No, it's not that way.
Yeah.
And then I finally got, I said the way that if something gets bigger in distance, then that would matter, right? She goes, yeah. And I said, okay, then the opposite has to be true. Something smaller, if it gets smaller with distance, has to be accounted for. And she sat up in bed like a pop-up book and said, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
I said, yes. Then I went out in the garage and called David Weiss. And David Weiss, for 5 or 10 minutes, was telling me, nope, you're wrong. Nope, you're wrong. And I was explaining to him a different way. And then finally he's like, you know what? You're right. And it's just funny because it seems like how everybody has to take it. But tell everybody how it started and kind of what your theory, hypothesis, or thesis is.
Well, Nath, if I could lead and then you could do the details afterwards.
Yep.
Basically, it came to me. We had a guy on the debate called Al Kay, and he did an observation that was trying to debunk Del from beyond the imaginary curve. And basically, what he was observing was a mountain of 1,100 feet from 38 miles away. And that rung a bell with me because I know that my observations were about 30-something miles away. And I'm thinking he's just going beyond that which I can already see. But he's got something at 1,100 feet. I thought, that's going to be behind the curve. Now, when we did the curve calcs on it, according to the Metabunk website, it was the tippy tops of it should be visible, but only the tippy tops of it, and that would be a little triangle, and it would be sat on the horizon. And the guy's got the whole rock on screen, and he's arguing that he couldn't see the lighthouse on the beach, which is only about 70 feet tall, and he's claiming that this is curvature and therefore proof of the Earth, the sphere Earth. And I'm thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. This is you're looking at the whole mountain, you moron. So I did a bit of research into it, and I was looking into it. And what I'm about to say now, I'm going to start with a disclaimer, because not everybody's going to get it straight away. It is obvious when you realise it, but because we've all been indoctrinated by this nonsense geometric curvy thing on the Metabunk website, what I'm about to say is putting it in a totally different perspective. And that perspective is our perspective. So if you don't get it straight away, it's fine. If you're a baller, you probably won't get it. If you're a flat earther, it may need a little bit of persuasion and a little bit of explaining it in a different way. But essentially, you may not get it straight away, and if you don't, that's fine. But when he was doing his presentation and claiming that this is matching the sphere Earth and all this, and I was looking at it, and I was thinking, this is ridiculous. It came to me whilst we were on the show, and I was trying to, because there's no science for a flat Earth, all the science is based on sphericity. I'm trying to explain a concept that I've got in my head, and I wasn't able to articulate it in a way that was coherent and that even Nathan understood. Because Nathan disagreed with me on a point that we actually agree on, because he thought I was making a different point, when I wasn't. It was just I wasn't expressing myself properly, because, again, there's no science on a flat Earth. Anyway, the following day, when I'd had a chance to reconvene my thoughts, basically, my position is this. If we live on a sphere, well, I'll start with a plane. I'll do it with flat plane first, because it's easier. If we live on a flat plane, then objects will just shrink over distance. End of sentence. If we live on a sphere, things will shrink over as a result of the distance, but they will also drop behind the curve. They'll also tilt backwards a little bit, and there will also there'll be a hump that appears between you and the target. But essentially, it will shrink in distance. Now, all the ballers that I have ever seen has always applied that refracted hidden value against the actual height of the thing. So if we're looking at, for example, a mountain at 1,000 feet, right? We know the mountain is 1,000 feet tall. But the only time it's 1,000 feet is when it's touching your nose. Because the further away it gets from you, that 1,000 feet gradually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, it obviously doesn't change its physical size. It's an apparent size reduction because of perspective. But none of them ever take that into account. So they always apply that refracted hidden value to the target at full height. Now, the only time it's like that is when it's touching your nose. So the distance thing, when you put it into Metabunk, should be 0. Or if you're going to put it in at 30 miles, then you've got to reduce it down according to perspective and then find out what its perceived height would be, its apparent height, because obviously it shrinks. But none of them ever do that. But the problem is, most observations over 20, 25 miles, unless it's gargantuan, the thing that you're looking at, it's going to shrink down to such an extent that it'll drop behind the hidden value, which of course will be the curvature of the Earth, and then it would never match any of the observations that we're all producing. So I was thinking to myself, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any logical sense. So I rang a couple of flat earthers and I tried to explain it, and I ended up with Adam Meakin from Iron Realm Media. And he said, hey, have you seen Taboo Conspiracy's video? And I was like, what are you talking about? I watch all of Taboo Conspiracy's videos, and I've missed this one because it happened whilst I was away. And it was the one. It was bizarre. It was the only one I'd missed because I watch every one he does. And I watched the video and I was like, oh my God, this guy's done it. He's done all the maths. He's done all the presentation. I don't have to do any work, just understand the point he's making. Now, then it takes me back onto my own journey. And I remember Antonio's made this point, and he was one of the first people that I ever saw making this point like 12, 18 months ago. But what Antonio didn't do was beat the drum about it. I know that Jeran gets the point. I know that Dr. Zach has made the point in the past before, and he's presented it. Taboo Conspiracy's now done it. But what we've not done is, because Flat Earth's generally quite disunited, none of us have collectively beat the drum about it. But I realise that we've all kind of got to this point somehow or another along the way. So basically, when I realised that Taboo had already done the video, and all I did was watch through the video, I spoke to him, and he said, look, there was a challenge on it. This was the basis. So with consideration of the criticism that he got, I watched the video, and I watched it a second time. It was only 8 minutes. And it dawned on me that this is exactly my point, but I'm not the only one that's made it. Taboo's done it. I remember Antonio specifically mentioning this in the past. Dr. Zach's done it, and probably others have done it. And what I realised was...
Jeranism,
we haven't...
can I just get in? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So this is months ago, and you will remember this, Jeranism. You made a video about Jesse, and he was pointing a theodolite, and I think it was another theodolite on the other side of a body of water. He's at about 300 feet, and you took his video, and as he's doing his explanation, you interrupt him in the edit and go, while he's saying because of, presumably, I didn't actually hear his original video, but he was presumably saying something along the lines of, because the Earth drops at X, Y, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And you interrupt him and say it's because of perspective.
Right. Yeah, because what they're doing is they're measuring from the observer's point of view, and I kind of figured out, I even got him to admit it on a little show we did, a non sequitur show, him and I said, so that if you're looking off into the distance, you're looking through more and more atmosphere, right? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, well, if light's traveling through more and more atmosphere, is it going to slow down? Which way is it going to bend? He said, it's going to bend down. Like, okay, well, do things get smaller in the distance? He said, yes. I said, okay, so then when you measure things in the distance and they're lower than you expect them, why have you not looked into the fact that it could be either perspective or atmospheric effects? You've just jumped straight to curvature. So yeah, I pointed out that, exactly that. Now I think that the idea of things then being measured by the curve calculator based on that new apparent height, that's kind of new to me. I mean, John mentioned it, but I couldn't quite grasp it until, like I said, it took me thinking about it and saying, if we lived in a world, which is impossible, I'm just saying, if we lived in a world where things got bigger with distance, which seems crazy, but let's just pretend we live there, and something was going to be blocked by a hill of water or whatever, the globe Earth, and it's 100 feet tall, and then somebody said, well, Jaren, will this be blocked by the curve of the Earth? And I knew that things got bigger. Well, I would have to know how much bigger does that item get, because if it doubles in size, maybe I would see it over the hill if I wouldn't have normally seen it. So once I realized that, I said, well, if things got bigger, it would definitely make a difference as to whether or not we can see them in the distance. So if things get smaller, then it makes a difference, and you have to account for it. And that was all it took to kind of convince myself.
So ultimately, if you think back to the main concept, which is the hidden height, the refracted hidden height on Metabunk is always applied to the actual, or the not the actual. It's the, what's the word that we used in tonight, Nath? It's the the absolute height of the target that you're looking at. So if it's a mountain at 1,000 feet, they'll apply it against that 1,000 feet. If you remember that in this context, right, that's what we're trying to show why this is wrong. I said to Nathan, I said, look, Nathan, this is making sense to me, but I can't get my words out because I don't quite know how to word it best. So we spoke about it, and he slept on it, and we basically thought about it, and ultimately we were like, it is right, but they're never going to accept it because this is so against the grain for their model. Nobody ever talks about it, and we didn't know how best to argue it. But ultimately, I'll pass to Nathan now with just the word orthographic, and then if Nathan takes over from the orthographic point.
Well, yeah, the how they've done it is relatively simple to explain. So whenever somebody shows you a curve calculator, they will always be showing you the observation side on. And so you can understand that, I mean, you will see the side of the head of the observer taking the photograph. So you see a side profile of both the target you are taking the picture of and comparing to this calculator, and the actual observation being made, i.e. the person with the camera in their hand and the side of their head. And by doing so, you retain the absolute values. And this isn't something that we can kind of rest on our laurels now. We've had confessions from several people, including Mick West himself, who formed the calculator. He formed a calculator. They're all basically the same, and they're all derived from the same standard model of Earth, something else Mick West confessed to. But ultimately speaking, that's what they do. They are performing what we would call an orthographic function. In other words, it excludes perspective by their own admission. So they are happy to admit that these calculations are, in their terminology, not performing a viewing function, which means it is not comparable to a camera or a video recorder of any description or your eyes, because your eyes do take into account perspective. And they can't take into account perspective because that's how the magic trick works. We don't have a curve to Earth's surface. It doesn't exist. It is flat. So I don't know how your audience goes in terms of globe as they might be listening to, but if you were unaware of this, tough luck. You don't have to like it. The Earth is actually flat. And that's a big problem if you've got to tell people that you're living on a sphere flying through space. So you have to engineer in this curve at ground level. Well, how they have engineered in the curve is to simply exclude this fact that objects in the distance do get smaller to your perception. And your perception, how this is quantifiable, is an angular size reduction. And the way you would acquire an angle to anything you view in the distance is to take a line to both top and bottom of that target, and that would give you an angle. Whereas what they do in the calculation is take a single line from observer to target. So they're saying this is the line of sight. Well, no. The line of sight is something that is all-encompassing, and when you are in first person, as you always are, you can't get away from first person, you can't get away from perspective. And when you take a picture of something, it will have, as you view the picture you have taken, converging lines coming from each corner, the top two corners down to the centre and the bottom two corners up to the centre. And those lines are converging at the midpoint. That is, in essence, what perspective is. But that effect of having two lines coming to a midpoint, obviously getting smaller for everything you see closer to that midpoint as it goes into the distance, that converging point requires two lines on anything in the frame of that picture to measure its angle. And that's how they exclude it. They draw a single line and demonstrate it. So it's easy to spot because you can see the actual observation taking place when they show it inside elevation. Now, I thought they'd have got around this quicker, and maybe I'm giving them tips here, but I thought what they would do is just get around it by putting it into first-person orthographic. So show the person taking the picture from their eyes, but still ignore perspective. So you can do an orthographic view from the eye of the observer. You know, Chris can do it, Chris Monk, who's been helping us with the modelling of this. Big shout out to Chris Monk. But he has been showing us that you can have an orthographic view from the eye of the observer. It just excludes perspective. And that's in essence what the magic trick does. The way you get curve on the ground without there being a curve is taking the fact that objects get smaller in the distance and completely excluding it from the maths and calling that effect of the inverse square law in action when you look at something and just calling it a curve. It isn't.
What you've done is you've completely exposed the entire practice of geodetic surveying, because geodetic surveying is that this is the problem with it, is that they're looking through a theodolite, which is a leveled telescope at the observer's point of view. And then they're looking for items in the distance and how much they've dropped. But they're not dropping due to the curvature of the Earth. And that's, this is the whole thing with the Bedford level experiment. This is the same idea that keeps getting stuck here, is because the Bedford level experiment, they basically measured those flags across the 6 miles and saw that they dropped below the level telescope that was viewing them. So they, the globe went off and celebrated the win, and it took Samuel Rowbotham to come back and said no. He said, if you want to see whether the Earth is flat or not, what you have to do is actually angle the telescope slightly down. Now, a lot of people are going to jump to that and say, what do you mean? Why would you? if it's flat, then it needs to be leveled telescope. But that's not true, because from that perspective, the telescope needs to be leveled down to where it's pointing and its crosshairs hit the first two flags. And then they will go evenly the rest of the way with the flags as they get smaller off into the distance. And that's proof that the Earth is flat, because there is no flag that would drop below that perspective line that you're looking at from the telescope. So, I mean,
of course.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to take that with a bit of caution, because if you remember what the evidence was for that assertion, it was based on illustrations that were drawn and verified by the judge at the time, who was probably a Mason, definitely a ball earther. But the evidence to support the position for the Bedford level experiment wasn't photographic, it was illustrative, and it was certified by the judge. But the problem with that is it true, right? How good is an illustration that's certified by a judge who may or may not have been a baller? So, although the point we're making is true, let's just apply caution to it, because you can't prove it.
Bedford level came out as the Globe 1. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that it was incorrectly applied, and Samuel Rowbotham came and said, this is how you've incorrectly looked at that. Yeah, and you're right. It was based on drawings shown to a judge, and the judge said, based on these drawings, here's the findings. But really what it came down to is that if you take a leveled telescope and you point it off into the distance and things start falling away, for instance, look at it this way. If you put a telescope on top of a telephone pole, you're looking at a long street with a bunch of telephone poles running down the side of it, and you climb up to the top of the telephone pole next to you, put a telescope leveled right on top of it. If you look through that telescope, the telephone poles in the distance will fall off the crosshairs of that telescope. The reason why is because the telescope doesn't know about perspective. It doesn't know that things get smaller with distance. The telescope is looking at its little tiny circle. That's its entire world, is what's in that little circle. So when things start falling away, we have to be smart enough, and those guys laugh at me, Jesse Kozlowski and all them, because I keep telling them, you have to tell the telescope that things get smaller with distance. And they laugh and have all kinds of great old time with that, because they don't understand what I'm saying, which is things get smaller in the distance, and our telescopes don't know that. And it makes a difference, because we're taking that observer's point of view. If we want to measure the Earth from a surveyor's point of view elsewise, then I wouldn't say that. For instance, if you're going to measure right to left, right, I'm going to see how much drop this guy is on the left versus this guy on the right. But they don't take that measurement. They take the measurement from the observer, just like what Nathan said. They're taking perspective and calling it curvature.
Yeah. We got time before the break to give a shout out to someone else who illustrated this, and how long we've got before the break.
And if you guys want to stay for just a few minutes after, let's see, we only have 2 more minutes. What else did you want to get out? Go try it.
Well, I can probably get it into 2 minutes. So Ranty did a beautiful visual demonstration of this by having the x-axis and y-axis, if I've got that right, turbines going into the distance, and then having the 90-degree adjacent view showing them flat as a pancake, which is how they're built. But then when you see them at distance, you can literally see perfectly perspective in action as they fall away without any curve. You can draw a straight line through it. So Ranty has done this. I've stuck it up as well on one of the channels. I think it was, I can't remember the debate number, maybe 177. But he shows wind turbines going into the distance, falling away exactly in line with perspective. And when you see them inside profile, they are perfectly flat. In other words, there is no x-axis curvature. And what they claim is curvature, you can see inside profile is flat, but still goes in line with perspective when you look down the line of these turbines, one after the other going into the distance. And that's Ranty Flat Earth. And
can you guys tell people where they can find you so that they can, stay? No, I was going to use your line and I forgot it. There, so they can stay up to date with the Flat Earth debate.
Yeah. Yeah, NathanOakley1980 is my channel if you want to keep up to date with the Flat Earth debate, and Sleep Warrior is Anthony's channel.
All right, thanks guys. Appreciate the interview. Appreciate you guys. Thanks.
So I hope you all enjoyed that TFR radio broadcast, and yes, thank you massively to all the people who hit the super chat. Hopefully you'll share this show and subscribe if you've not done so already. Massive thank you to Jeren for having us on that broadcast. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I will see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!